Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro, obviously, the most prominent thing that happens in this week's Parsha is the giving of the Torah. There's no question about that. So we're going to go a little bit off the beaten path, actually, and we're going to talk about something that is not literally in the context of anything that's written in the Parsha, but it's a very important part of what it all boils down to, what Matan Torah is about, and how we go about day-to-day life and living life in line with that which we were given on Mount Sinai at the giving of the Torah. So, we're going to actually start with a story, which is kind of apropos because it's a story. 1 second, and we are done. We can go away. It's a story that actually relates somewhat to Yud Shvat, because it's a story of the grandmother of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbanis Rivka, and she actually, the day of her passing was Yud Shvat. The Maimer Bossi Legani, which was originally written and dedicated to 3 Yom Ha'Lulas in the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. One of them was Yud Shvat. The reason it was published on Yud Shvat officially, and the reason that's written, is for the Rebbe's and Rivka's Yom Ha'Lulah, Yom Histalkus, the day that the Rebbe's and Rivka passed away. So, the reason that we actually missed class last week, or that I didn't teach this class last week, was because of Yud Shvat. This Maimer of Bossi Legani was actually given out on Yud Shvat, officially, at that time, ostensibly for the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's and Rivka, of the Frierdiker Rebbe's grandmother. Practically speaking, we now know, we see very clearly, it's readily evident, that obviously a big part of the reason it was given out was because of what happened that year, in Tafshin Yud, in 1950, on Yud Shvat, which was that the Frierdiker Rebbe ceased to be with us here in the physical body. And the Maimer of Bossi Legani is, in a major way, the Frierdiker Rebbe's marching orders for us today, since then, going forward. So, what's this story? This is a story that the Frierdiker Rebbe actually wrote down about his grandmother. And the story goes that when she was, well, still a teenager, she was 18 years old, she was in a state of less than fantastic health. And she went to a doctor. The doctor told her that in order for her to regain her strength and to get back to a state of optimum health, she has to eat first thing in the morning every day. She has to get up first thing in the morning, she has to eat. Now, we know that halacha says you have to follow the instructions of a doctor. When a person's unwell, Torah says go see a doctor, seek the help of a qualified medical professional, and follow their counsel. Just a little bit of a sidetrack, that something the Rebbe always pushed very strongly is, keep in mind the distinction between following their counsel and taking everything they say in complete faith. Doctors are able to heal. Doctors are able to take the information that is achieved through scientific research and to use that information to give instructions, directions, and treatments to help people achieve a state of improved health, because Torah says so. Torah gives doctors the permission and ability to heal people. God grants doctors the ability to heal people. It doesn't say anywhere in Torah that doctors are authorities on prognoses, that doctors have the ability to determine how much longer a person will or will not live. And the context in which the Rebbe said that was that when a person goes to a doctor, and it's a very common thing, certainly with certain kinds of diseases, unfortunately, that, people, it's a very common phrase, a person has so and so many weeks left to live. That's not to say that that is completely irrelevant, and I'm not claiming that doctors are stupid or anything else. Doctors are, for the most part, incredibly dedicated people who oftentimes sacrifice their entire lifestyle, really, to helping other people. And, to be frank, there are people who I've known who got such prognoses that proved to be accurate almost to the day. But there are very, very, very many stories of people who got such prognoses that had a certain number of days to live, or months, or weeks, or even hours. And I actually have an acquaintance who was given 36 hours. He was in an extremely traumatic accident split his head open, literally, like they said, that's it. They called the family in and said, spend your last hours together with him. And today, Baruch Hashem, he's a shliach on campus with children and everything else. So, very successful. So, it's important just to remember to respect the distinction between, and not to mix them up. The fact that we don't just take for granted that if a doctor says a person's time is up in such and such an amount of time, the fact that we are not going to entirely respect that and say, okay, time to give up hope and for everybody to start crying, that means it's time to double down on faith and to double down on doing everything we can to strengthen our connection to God, to do what we can to increase God's predisposition to make this person live longer by doing more mitzvahs in their merit, etc. And frankly, to pray and to beg. But the fact that we don't attribute such a high level of respect to prognoses and to time limits that doctors give does not mean that we don't give the utmost respect to their directions. Again, just a side note, and I'm mentioning it because it could be important to know practically speaking. Many, many times people came to the Rebbe and said, no, I have such and such a problem, and the doctor said to do this and this treatment, and the Rebbe would often say, because it's such a serious situation, go get a second opinion from another equally highly qualified professional. Don't just go and ask your friend over a drink what they think. Go get a second opinion from a second equally qualified medical health professional. If their opinions differ, go for a third opinion. So it doesn't necessarily mean, and again, there are plenty of instances where medical professionals are humans just like everyone else, and they can also be wrong. And it doesn't mean that we have to always necessarily just accept everything someone says because they're a doctor. But at the same time, halachically, we are directed to get the counsel of and follow the directives of medical health professionals. So back to the story at hand. So the Rebbetzin was instructed by this doctor to eat first thing in the morning as a means to regain her strength and to get back to a state of optimum health. So Torah says, halacha says, you ask a doctor, you listen, and you follow their guidelines, their directives. So she wanted to make sure to eat first thing in the morning. She also knows that Shulchan Aruch says that we don't eat in the morning before davening. And to go a little deeper, not just because Shulchan Aruch says so, because we know that as much as on one level it's very important to follow the directives of Shulchan Aruch exactly, 100%, regardless, at the same time it adds a lot of value in terms of our personal experience and in terms of the degree of connection that we have with the Creator through following the guidelines of Shulchan Aruch if we understand what they're about and if we have a deeper appreciation for the meaning that they carry. And it's quite simple, really. Davening is connecting, praying. It's not supposed to be rote. It's not supposed to be wake up in the morning, open a book, flip the pages, and rattle the words off as quickly as we can. That's not what it's about. The word tefillah, Hebrew for prayer, means, in some contexts, the same word means to connection, to bind things together, to unify. So davening prayer is supposed to be an experience of communicating, of having an open communication with God. When we communicate, we become one entity to an extent. When we're communicating with someone, there is a dialogue. We become unified to an extent with God through prayer. And depending on how deep we go in terms of our own preparation for prayer and our meditation and contemplation and how deep we go, we can become one with God in much more than just the fact that we're united in dialogue. We can deepen our perception and our sense of identity to the point where we appreciate the fact that we really are at essence one with God, and we can become one with God personally. Now, that is the driving force behind, or supposed to be the driving force behind everything we do throughout the day. So it makes a lot of sense that first thing in the morning when we wake up, before we start taking care of all the other things, and it's important to take care of things, it's important to be practical, it's important to be grounded, it's important to have a practical direction in life. But at the same time, if we want all of that to stay on track and to stay true to what it's supposed to be, it's very important to start the day off with something that gets us grounded, gets us in the zone, and gets our perception on track and on target so that everything we do throughout the day will be done for the right reasons, with the right driving force, with the right energy, etc. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that Shulchan Aruch says first thing you do in the morning, before you eat, before you do anything else, is to pray, is to daven, is to have this personal experience where we align ourselves with our purpose and with the Creator. The Creator being that which determines what our purpose is. So, the Rebbetzin said, you know what? Doctor said I have to eat early in the morning. I don't want to eat before I daven. I want to make sure that I daven and I have this experience of getting myself aligned and on track and one with God before I start doing things such as eating. She got up earlier so that she could eat early in the morning but daven before she ate. Now, one doesn't have to be a prophet. Well, it's not prophecy because it's back in time, it's not forward in time, but one doesn't have to be overly have an uncanny deductive ability to be able to understand that a very likely outcome of such a scenario is that she's going to become even weaker. Because now, not only does she have a pre-existing state of lack of full strength, she's also getting less sleep at night. She's getting up earlier in the morning, still not eating first thing in the morning and taking time to daven before she eats. And it wasn't helpful for her state of health. And the Tzemach Tzedek told her off, the Tzemach Tzedek readjusted her perspective. And the Tzemach Tzedek told her that it's better to eat in order to daven than to daven in order to eat. So the Torah says, there's a pasuk that says about it says you shall observe the mitzvahs, etc., v'chai b'hem, and you shall live with them. So accepting certain very specific, uncommon scenarios, hopefully uncommon, a person is obligated to do whatever it takes to save a life, including doing something that would generally be prohibited by Torah. If a person's life is at risk, you are obligated to break Shabbos. And again, I don't know whether or not I mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it. It's a minor sidetrack, but it's something that's very important for as many people as possible to know. That I was told this in the name of Rabbi Heller, as a Rav, formerly a Rav on the Beis Din, currently the head of the Kollel here, etc. Definitely, without argument, one of the most senior Rabbonim in the community. I heard in his name, and I went to confirm it with him in person, because you never rely on something that someone told you that a Rav said, that because we live in an urban place, in a place that's very highly populated, if you see a fire on Shabbos, despite the fact that it is a scriptural prohibition to put a fire out on Shabbos, it's a Yisro d'oraisa, because of the way we live today in urban places, if you see a fire on Shabbos, you don't stop, you don't think, you don't ask questions, you just put it out. And he said, absolutely, 100%. Because of the density with which people are populated today, there's absolutely no question that you can't risk to let a fire burn the 1 second longer than absolutely necessary. And he said that it's a mitzvah to let as many people as possible to know. So if you live in an urban area, if you live in a place where certainly Brooklyn is probably just about as good example as you're going to get, maybe there, I don't know, Tokyo and Manhattan are a little more, but it's pretty extreme here, overpopulation. You see a fire on Shabbos, you put it out. You don't ask questions, you don't think, you don't try to come up with a strategy to do it in a way that's less prohibited. The biggest mitzvah you can do is to put it out ASAP in whatever way you can. Whatever will be the most effective to put the fire out the fastest, that's what you do. Back to the topic at hand. Again, for the second time today. So, saving life is paramount. Almost always, other mitzvahs, it's not a case of you're allowed to transgress a mitzvah to save a life. You are obligated to transgress a mitzvah to save a life, and you're actually not transgressing anything. You are fulfilling a mitzvah, because right now the Torah says that even though under normal circumstances, such and such an act, whatever it would be, in this instance it's putting out a fire, is prohibited on Shabbos, and the Torah actually says that it's punishable by capital punishment under very specific circumstances. At the same time, Torah says that if someone's life is at risk, even possibly at risk, and you can reduce the risk to people's lives by putting this fire out ASAP, you are halachically obligated to do it, and Shabbos wants you to do it, and Torah wants you to do it. So protecting life comes first. Torah says so. So the Tzemach Tzedek said to the Rebbetzin, Torah says v'chai b'hem, you're supposed to live with them. Chai also is the root of the word chayos, or chiyut, you'd say in Ivrit, which means liveliness, live force, energizedness, energetically. Torah is supposed to be done passionately, energetically. If a person's in a state that they have less than optimum energy levels, less than optimum physical strength, less than optimum state of health, obviously there are times, many times when it's not a person's fault, but if a person allows that to happen voluntarily, essentially what they've done is put themselves in a position where they are not capable of studying Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs in the way that they should be doing so. So, we are obligated according to Torah. First of all, we're obligated according to Torah. Second of all, if we want to do Torah, to follow Torah mitzvahs in the best way, if we want to fulfill what God wants in the best way, we have to make sure that we are as energized as possible, we are as healthy as possible, we are as physically strong as possible, then we can do the best job. So the Tzemach Tzedek said to her, so that's number one. You are halachically obligated to take care of your health. If the doctor says eat first thing in the morning, eat first thing in the morning. Don't wake up earlier so that you can daven first and make yourself even weaker. The doctor said, you follow the doctor's instructions. Then it goes a little deeper with what the Tzemach Tzedek added and said, Beser essen zu lib davenen, wie davenen zu lib essen. It's better to eat in order to daven than to daven in order to eat. Now, obviously, this applies under these circumstances, and this is a foundation of something that is done a lot today. And in Shulchan Aruch itself, it talks within very specific circumstances, the ones that are described in Shulchan Aruch, where if a person needs to partake of some sort of oral nutrition, let's say, in order to be able to daven properly, then they can and should. And this is why. This is why Shulchan Aruch says that. Because if a person has two options, the options are I wake up, I'm hungry. I can go ahead and daven so that I'll be able to eat because I'm hungry, and chances are most of the time I'm davening, I'm going to be thinking about how hungry I am and the fact that I'm going to get to eat after I finish davening. In which case, although I've davened halachically, the soul of my davening, the true identity of my davening was a preparation to eating. I got to get this out of the way so I can eat. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, and are all of us capable of achieving this hypothetically? Possibly. We should get to a position where we can wake up and say, yes, I'm hungry, but you know what? I'm going to get into a state, into a zone where it's irrelevant, it's not going to affect me, I'm going to be able to daven with proper focus and concentration, and put that completely on the side, and still not eat until after I daven. And if we can get there, that's awesome. Should we strive to get there? Yes. One of the ways that we might be effective in getting there is by making sure that today I can daven effectively. And if I'm not in a position to do that yet, then if today I know that I'm hungry and I'm not going to be able to focus on my davening, and if I have something to eat quickly before I daven, I will not be hungry and I'll be able to focus better on my davening and to be able to daven more really and effectively, then halacha will say that I'm allowed to have something to eat first. It's not actually eating. It is eating technically, but if it's done right, the truest identity of what I'm doing is not eating, it's preparing for davening. The same way that davening to get it out of the way so that I can eat because I'm hungry, the true identity of that davening, in a way, is preparing to eat. It's the same in the reverse. If I want to daven effectively, I want my davening to be real, I want to have a real personal interaction with my Creator today. I want to have a dialogue. I want to talk to God. I want it to be a personal, emotional experience in which I connect to and interact with my Creator. And in order to do that with focus and not get distracted by the hunger pains in my stomach, I have something to eat first, and that's the sole reason that I eat. Then what I'm doing essentially really is preparing to daven. And that's what the Tzemach said, Besser essen zu live daven, and it's better to eat in order to daven, in which case the true identity of the eating is preparation to daven, rather than davening in order to eat, in which case the real identity of the davening is preparation to eating. So the two actions are the same, but the question is, what's the true identity of these two activities? We can either, depending on the order in which we do them, practically speaking for most of us, they can either be both davening, the preparation to davening and then the actual davening, or they can be both eating, the preparation to eating and then the actual eating. That's not to say that if a person is able to get up and to daven without having to eat first, they shouldn't. Absolutely. That is the ideal state in which it should be done. But halacha allows for one to eat first if that is what is required to be able to daven effectively, without feeling weak or being distracted. Yeah.
So if one needs like coffee before they daven, but really doesn't need to eat breakfast, they could just have their coffee.
Absolutely.
And they're totally following what the Tzemach said.
Yes, correct. Okay. And if a person doesn't need coffee either, kol hakavod, even better. But if they do, so.
But it's perfectly permissible to just have your coffee and then daven, and then if you eat afterwards or you eat
100%. It doesn't say anywhere, the Tzemach Tzedek didn't say there is a mitzvah to eat before davening. The Tzemach Tzedek said better to eat in order to daven rather than to daven in order to eat. If a person is in a position that based on the habits they've built up or whatever it is, a person's fine to get up and prepare to daven and to get in the zone and to do whatever they have to do to prepare to daven properly, which is also a mandate of Shulchan Aruch, to get in the zone. And then to daven without having to eat or drink anything first, kol hakavod, awesome. That is the ideal state of affairs. At the same time, it's important to respect the fact that if a person's not up to that, then halacha makes allowance for them to do what they need to do to get into the zone. And there's obviously no obligation to do more than a person needs. Yeah.
Is this talking about before morning breakfast, or it's after the whole davening?
Before morning brachas is probably pushing it.
No, that's what I'm saying. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, after brachas, I would say.
And then people don't eat until after the davening.
Correct. That's the ideal way that it should be done according to Shulchan Aruch, is to not eat anything until after the whole shachris. Yeah. And that's why Shulchan Aruch makes an allowance and says that if you need to have a coffee before in order to be able to daven like a mensch, then you can and should. Okay, so now, what does this mean to us? And not just, that was pretty smooth, I almost didn't notice you were there.
She's been here all the time. No.
So.
Where you were, because we were thinking of everything as friends.
Yes, no, this is usually on Monday. Probably had 3 different schedules in the last 5 weeks. It's supposed to be, as of now, double period on Monday. So.
This is Monday.
Well, the day on the calendar and on the week is Tuesday. The true identity of the day for this hour and 10 minutes is really Monday. So the question is, what do these represent more broadly in our lives? Not only every day, because davening and eating should be happening every day, but at every point throughout the day. Every point throughout every day, there's eating in order to daven versus davening in order to eat. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean specifically just the physical act of taking food and putting it in the mouth and chewing and swallowing, because that's probably not what we should be doing all day. Probably should make time for some other things as well. But eating, and this is an example we see throughout Tanya, that the Alter Rebbe repeatedly brings eating as the analogy, as the metaphor, or maybe not even, it's not a metaphor analogy, as the representative example of acts, of materialistic acts. And it's because it's something, number one, everybody can relate to. We all want to do it. And we all enjoy it. We all, yes. La briot, zu gesund. Bon appetit, beteavon, etc. And it's something that we all look forward to. We all need it, frankly. And that's where the discussion gets a little more nuanced, the needing versus the wanting and the balance between the two, etc. But food is something that we all relate to. We may have different tastes specifically of the foods that we want to have, but we all relate to wanting to eat. So eating is the representative example of acts of materialism, acts of physicality, things we do that are part of the day-to-day life on the part of our body as a living human being. Another big part of that obviously is going to be going to work, running a business, generating income. Is another big example. That's an example that the Rebbe brings a lot in the Sichos, especially in these early ones. And we'll see, depending on how we go, that the Rebbe actually sometimes gets a little facetious in these talks in this period, because it was early, it was in the 1950s. Facetious, sarcastic. And thank you on behalf of anyone else who didn't know what the word meant. And it was a time when there was this perspective that America's different, and this was something that the Frierdiker Rebbe battled against, and the Frierdiker Rebbe screamed against it. America is nicht anders. People came to America and they said, well, that was in Europe, and in the towns in Europe, we had to really follow Torah and mitzvahs properly and keep the customs that our parents and grandparents kept. Came to America, land of opportunity. America is anders, people said. They may not have been observing Torah and mitzvahs, but they still spoke Yiddish. That was what they grew up with in Europe. America is anders. America is different. Here you can be Jewish and just do what you got to do. And the Frierdiker Rebbe took a stand and said, America is nicht anders. America is no different. The same creator that created Europe created America. And the same creator that was present in Europe and there and interacting with you and making you exist and all your circumstances exist and on the receiving end of everything you did and every choice you made to do right or wrong is present here in America, and all those things are true in America. So no, America is nicht anders, is what the Frierdiker Rebbe said. America is the same. Because this was a time when, and we have to keep in mind that times were very different to today. It's, we, thank God, are very blessed to live in a time when we can pretty much get away with whatever we want. You can be successful in business by keeping Shabbos, having a beard. You can be a chaplain in the army and have a beard, which was unheard of not very long ago. A lot more recently than 1950. So, but this was a time when things were much more challenging, and I want to acknowledge that just to make it clear that it's easy, relatively easy for us to sit here today and look back and say whatever someone might want to say about it. They were very difficult times. People used to lose their jobs on a weekly basis. People would get a job, go for a job on Monday, and when they didn't show up on Shabbos, they'd lose their job and have to find another job every week. It was very, very difficult times, and there wasn't money. It's not like they were earning $5,000 a week, and if they lost their job, they'd be okay for another couple of weeks. People, as it was, were barely earning enough to buy bread and water, and they would lose their job every weekend for keeping Shabbos. They were very, very difficult times. Very difficult times. But at the same time, the fact is that the same God that was there in Europe, the same creator that created Europe, created America, and is still here. So because some of these, and again, just because of the direction that this took, I want to clarify the difference between, it's one thing to be sympathetic and empathetic to people's circumstances and to not judge people, because it's never my job to judge anybody, unless I get a job as a judge, which I don't plan on doing, either here or in the Sanhedrin when Mashiach comes. And Pirkei Avos says that don't judge someone else until you reach his place, or as they say in English, until you've walked a mile in his shoes. And you never walk a mile in someone else's shoes because you don't know what they go through inside. So it's never our job to judge someone else. It's our job to be empathetic, to be sympathetic, to be loving and caring. It's also our job to give direction where appropriate to try and help people improve. Of course, it doesn't mean that we have to just say everything's good if it's not, because that's not really helpful or loving at the end of the day. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to condone perspectives that are wrong. And the Rebbe epitomized this to an extreme degree. Being absolutely empathetic and unconditionally loving, at the same time being demanding and giving tough love where it was appropriate, and making sure to take a stand against perspectives that are wrong. So, at the same time as we can never judge someone for what they did, we can say that if there was a prevailing perspective, collectively, that people would say America is different, and therefore we don't need to keep Shabbos, therefore we don't need to observe Torah, that is a wrong perspective. And that is something that we definitely have to take a stand against. And that's the kind of perspective that the Rebbe was getting sarcastic about over here, and we'll get to it. So there, the Rebbe brings a lot of times, one of the examples is obviously livelihood and people's pursuit of financial achievement, which is something that America is known for and something that America was known for then. The pursuit of academic achievement, which is something that America is and was known for. And these are things that the Rebbe mentions sometimes sarcastically, including in this talk, and we may get to it. We'll get to it. The question is how much we're going to focus on it as we pass by, as we pass through. But, so, eating is the foremost example of these things, of eating, of cars and houses and careers that are glamorous and bring extreme financial success. All these things are in this category of eating. And honestly, those are examples that I brought that are maybe on the pinnacle and make it sound very materialistic, but it's not, it doesn't have to go to that extent, to that degree. It could be eating breakfast, lunch, and supper every day. It could be earning a living so that we can support ourselves in a basic way. It could be having a wardrobe that allows us to be presentable and to be menschlich as we go throughout the day. Whatever it is, anything that we go through that's not Torah and mitzvahs is in the category of eating. Or is in that category that is represented by eating in the context of this expression. Then there is davening, tefillah. The word tefillah means connection, to become one, to bind together. And this is the example of all the things that are in the other category. In the category of things that we are doing not to get by in life, physically, but the things that we are doing that are more directly associated with the purpose and meaning of life. What's the purpose and meaning of life? Again, for a change as usual, we always come back to it, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is dir b'tachtonim. Making the material world divine, bringing God into this world, making the material world into a dwelling place for God, uniting matter and spirit, etc., etc., etc. There are 1,000 different ways we could put it. Aligning the world with its purpose. Torah is the blueprint of creation. Right? Zohar says that God looked into the Torah and created the world. So the true identity of the world and everything that exists in it is things that are created for a reason, as outlined in the Torah and as detailed in the Torah. When we follow the directives, the guidelines of the Torah, we align the world with its purpose. That's what we're here to do. So, tefillah represents the things that are more on the purpose, on the soul of existence end of the scale, as opposed to the body of existence, which is the world, the money, the food, etc. The soul, Torah study, mitzvahs, things that we would perhaps label very broadly in the basket of spirituality, those are the things that are represented by davening. So if we divide up everything in our life into one of these two baskets, there's the eating basket, or the basket which the example that sits at the top for all of us to look at is eating, and there's the basket which the example that sits on top for us to look at is davening. Because davening is the foremost example of an activity in which the foremost purpose and the purpose that we are experiencing, not just the purpose deep down, but the purpose that we're actually engaging with on a personal level, is to connect with God, is to become one with the Creator. Now, both of these have roles to play in our life every day, and honestly, practically speaking, for most people throughout the majority of the duration of our lives, most of our waking hours are spent in the food basket rather than in the prayer basket. It's just the way it is. Right? Shulchan Aruch says that if a person is able to support themselves, support their family, and take care of their needs with 2 hours of work a day, and they earn enough and they can spend the rest of the day studying Torah, they should. They can and should and perhaps even must. If a person needs to work 14 hours a day to be able to support their family, and as a result, they are only able to, in extreme circumstances, even just say Shema in the morning at night and are not able to study another word of Torah throughout the day because they literally don't have the time. They open their eyes, say Shema, work all day, come home, say Shema, and don't have word for an additional minute of Torah study. Under such extreme circumstances where that's really the situation that a person is in, then the same halacha says that that's what they should do. So, for most people, the majority of what we do throughout our day, and this is the way it is sanctioned and required by halacha for most people, have to spend the majority of their day involved in the eating basket, in working, in pursuing livelihood with which to support themselves and their family, and the people that are dependent on them, whoever they are. The question now is, what are the priorities? We know what the physical identity of things are. Let's talk about the Hebrew words that can get a little deep, but in Chassidus we have the words metzius and muhus. Metzius, I've never seen this anywhere, to be honest. I want to give that disclaimer, but I think it works. People throw around the word in Hebrew, it's a metzia. Literally, translation of a word metzia, what people usually mean when they said, I found a metzia, they mean a bargain, I found a good deal. The word metzia literally means a find. Limtzo means to find something. When you find something, what does that mean? When you find something, it means it is found, it is presented to you, you encounter it. The metzias that something has is the way it is encountered, the way it is found. So a person's metzias, on a certain level, is their body. It's the way that they are encountered by people. When I encounter a person, when I find a person, when I encounter a person, what am I encountering? I'm not encountering their etzem hanefesh. I should be, but I'm going to make a public confession that I don't yet. Right? I encounter the person they are on the surface level. That's the metzias. It's the way that a person is encountered, the way that something is encountered. It's the way it is presented, its presentation. That's what it is. Then there's what is its truer identity. And the identity of something really, even deeper perhaps than the actual muhus, just get back to these two words, muhus, which is not really the word I want to get more into. I want to get into metzias, but the word muhus, people, when studying Chassidus, people usually say muhus. If you look at the actual word to understand what does it mean, the word is mahus. Ma, what? The mahus, the whatness. Not how do I encounter it, what is it? This is the whatness of the thing. This is what it is. It's not the way it's presented, it's not the way I encounter it, it's what it is. Now, all of us, if we take a second to think, not about who people see when they look at us, or when they talk to us, or when they think about us, but who we are, who am I, ma, what am I, my mahus, my whatness, what am I, inside who and what am I, that's very different, and that's something that no one else is ever going to encounter or experience. So that's just a little bit on the word mahus. But the metzias is the way that something is encountered, the way that it's presented. Then there's the real identity. A deeper identity than just what it is deep down is, why is it here? Why does it exist? What's making it exist? What's its purpose? What's the creative energy that's making it exist? And why? And what's it here for? So, the question now is, with these two baskets, how do we look at them? The bulk of the day may be the food basket, but if we eat in order to daven, if everything that we do that falls into the food basket is oriented towards the spiritual basket, if when I go to work it's for the right reasons, it's because I want to do what Torah says, which is honestly pursue a living so that I can support myself and the people around me, so that I can give tzedakah, so whatever it is, for all these reasons, because Shulchan Aruch says so, then I am eating in order to daven. Because the soul of the things in the food basket, the soul, the reason, the identity of my job is not a career. The identity of my job, the truer identity of my job deep down, is a way to achieve what God wants. It's a way, it's a part of the process of making this world into a dur b'tachtonim.
So if the means to the end of the food basket is to get into the davening basket, that's the goal.
Correct. Well, I wouldn't say to get it.
Like to put the food, the energy that went into the food basket to sort of transfer it into the davening basket, but it should give life to the davening.
Or that's in the food example, correct. In that actual example that we gave in this story, you see it more literally, because the food is actually in order to be able to daven effectively on a practical level. Here what we're doing is going deeper, so that even in instances where you don't see that connection directly, but the driving force and the energy behind the things that are in the food basket, in the material basket, all of them are oriented towards the end goal, which is the davening basket, achieving the purpose of creation, aligning the universe with its purpose, which is to unite matter and spirit, to bring God into this world and make a difference.
Work to pay your tuition here to learn.
Correct.
Not just because you want that.
Correct. Now, and honestly, the Rebbe actually does, Kedarko Kodesh, a very good job in this sikha of translating that even to circumstances where one might be inclined to judge. And we'll see how we go. But the Rebbe breaks this down, I'm getting there, the Rebbe breaks this down into a couple of different ways that a person could live life. So one way that a person can live life is that the two baskets are separate. My davening basket is the davening basket, and when I'm davening, I'm all in on davening. I don't think about the world, I don't think about food, I don't think about cars or ice cream or money or anything else. I'm all in on davening. And when I'm learning, wait for it, it's not going to be so pretty all the way through in this example. And when I'm learning, I'm all in on learning. I'm not thinking about anything else, there are no distractions. When I go to business to earn money, I'm all in on making money.
That's the problem.
That's right. So I'm all in on making money, and I'm not thinking about davening, and I'm not thinking about Torah, and I'm not thinking about the laws of how to go about making money the way that God says I should make money, aka, to be honest, primarily. That's a big problem. So having the davening basket over here and the eating basket over here and keeping them completely separate is not a very good state of affairs.
So why are they even two different baskets?
Because the fact is they are different kinds of activities. Actual activities are different. So then we can go up a level to a point where a person does everything right, and it may be that when I go to work, the extent to which I'm all in on making money is only to the extent that is allowed and encouraged, even maybe by halacha. And I do everything in a way not just that's required according to halacha, but in a way that's suggested and recommended. In a way that would be in line with Pirkei Avos and being a person who goes beyond the letter of the law and being menschlich and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's still about my career. It's still about my financial success. And I have a very strong faith in God, and I have a very strong faith in the unity of everything that exists. And therefore, I understand that my achievements in my personal pursuits are going to be dependent on the extent to which God wants them to happen, which to an extent will be dependent on my towing the line. So I tow the line, and I daven properly, I pray properly, and I study Torah properly, and I give tzedakah properly, and I do everything properly because I want to get on side so that God should allow me to achieve the success that I want to achieve. Now, honestly, this is an achievement, and this is a person who should not be ridiculed at all. This is a person who's following everything by the book, which in some way, shape, or form is probably more than most people can say about themselves in an absolute degree. But we could be talking here about an instance where there's a person who does every single thing by the book. Everything according to Shulchan Aruch, everything according to Pirkei Avos, everything according to the way it should be done, but the soul is in the wrong basket. Everything in the davening basket is done the way it's supposed to be, but the person is davening in order to eat. The true identity of the things that are in the davening basket is preparation to get to the eating basket. It's davening in order to eat. It's doing all the spiritual things, all the things that connect us to God and make us one with God in the correct way, but with the wrong driving force. Our heart is in the wrong place in this example. And this is what the Tzemach Tzedek is telling us. The Tzemach Tzedek says it's better to eat in order to daven than to daven in order to eat. True that it's admirable to do everything correctly. Not only admirable, it's extremely admirable and not fully ideal, but in a certain sense, it's quite something to aspire to do everything exactly correctly and by the book. But if we're doing everything by the book in order to achieve the things that we want for ourselves, we are davening, we are praying in order to eat, then that means that our priorities are off kilter. And this is how the story of the Rebbetzin and Rivka translates to all of us throughout our day, every day. If, when we get up in the morning, just 1 second, we get up and we say brachos and we daven and we do everything right because we want to get to work already so that we can make progress in our career and advance our career and grow our business so we can be more and more successful because we want to be successful and we want to have status. True, it's all legit according to halacha, but the soul of it is wrong. The identity of all the things we're doing is not what it should be because we're praying in order to eat.
But all of the things in davening are, like, it's praising God, and then it's asking Him for all of our God's needs to be met, and, you know, for miracles to happen, and so that is one of the reasons for prayer. So how could we say that it's not, that it's really a spiritual reason when we're asking for things?
It's a good question. It's an important question. I'm glad you asked it. I would maybe make a distinction between saying that's what davening is versus saying that's why we daven. Right? We are supposed to ask for the things we need very practically in day-to-day life. That essentially, if you boil davening down to its purest form halachically, the simplest halachic definition of prayer is asking God for the things we need. And that's fine. But we shouldn't just be davening in order, we shouldn't only be approaching this activity of davening because we want to get things. Right? We can approach davening because it's the right thing to do, and in the course of davening, ask for the things we need. Now again, throughout the day, if a person stops and just prays and says, you know, Hashem, help me out, I really need a hand here, that's a good thing. That's not to say that their whole davening should always just be solely in order to achieve personal status or to achieve whatever a person's personal pursuits are. Now, in truth, a part of why davening is so important, and there are authorities who actually don't even count davening as one of the 613 mitzvahs, one of the reasons that's given is because it's not a specific mitzvah. It's the foundation of everything. Because when we we pray, when we come to God and say, look, God, help me out, what we're doing essentially is recognizing and acknowledging the fact that everything we have comes from God. And that the truest identity of everything that exists is something that's being made to exist by God for a reason. That's why when we need things, we come to God. So it's a recognition that underlies everything else that we do. So that's a very healthy thing, and asking for things we need is important. It's halakhically important, and it's the purest form of prayer that there is. At the same time, that doesn't mean that that should be the extent of our prayer, or that should be the sole reason that we pray. And at the same time, if you look at the davening right in Shemona Esrei, in the Amidah, the bulk of it in the middle is all these things. It's asking for very practical, it's asking for livelihood, it's asking for physical health, it's asking for, for whatever it is, etc., for wisdom and for everything else. But if you look at everything leading up to there, we have the whole Psukei de Zimra, we have the blessings of Shema, all these things that, practically speaking, most of the time on a day-to-day basis, probably for most people, take up more time than the Amidah, because that's a process of getting into the zone, so that when we go and ask for all these things, we're not just saying, hey, I need some stuff, can I have it? It's a lot more than that, because we've gone through a process of getting in the zone and getting into a place where our mind is more oriented, the orientation of our mind is more in line with the way it's supposed to be. And the perspective changes, and there's nothing wrong with asking for these things, but at that point, the state that we should ideally be in is one where it's not just about asking for things. The asking for things can, in and of itself, the requesting practical material things can be a part of something greater. And they don't have to be separate. And in a way, that's really what we're getting at. That's what part of that really, in a way, what this message is. It's not saying that there's something wrong with having a big eating basket, a big basket full of the things that are represented by eating, the material things, the work, and the pursuit of financial success, etc. Those are not bad things, but the question is, what are they about? If we're approaching those things with a healthy frame of mind that's oriented the way it's supposed to be, then that's fine. It's a good thing. That's what life is about. Right? If, and that's exactly the message, if we're eating, it doesn't, the Tzemach Tzedek didn't say to her, don't eat. But he said, it's better to eat in order to daven than to daven in order to eat. It's better that you should eat. And in this example, it was something that was, under other circumstances, wouldn't have been questionable according to halacha. But it's better to eat before davening if the doctor said that that's what you have to do. Because although you're eating first, the true identity of your eating is part of the process of davening. So, if we want to say conceptually, her eating basket may have gotten bigger, the material part of her day may have taken become more prominent, because she used to wake up and start davening. And now the Tzemach Tzedek was telling her, wake up and eat and then daven, because that's what you need to do for your health. So the eating basket, the material part of her day, had just become more prominent, practically speaking. If you would measure her day and the order that things are in, you'd say, this just went up to the top of the list. But although it became more prominent in terms of the magnitude that it took up in her day, the whole identity of the eating now was in order to pray. The identity of this material activity was really something spiritual. So the idea is that we should daven and we should ask for the things that we need, but it should be done from a healthy perspective. It should be done with a mind that is oriented the way it's supposed to be. So when we ask for these things, it's not just, hey, I want lots of money because I want to be famous and have status and be able to buy lots of things and stuff, and everybody should want to be my friend or pretend to be my friend, right? But if a person approaches prayer and understands that they're here for a reason and they have a purpose, and part of what they're supposed to do is to support themselves and their family and to have the things that they need, and they're praying to be successful at that, then they're pursuing financial stability, but for the right reason. Their pursuit of financial stability is healthy. It's not just a pursuit of status and glamour. It's a pursuit of something that they should be pursuing, but for the right reason and with the right perspective. That's exactly the message of the story. The main thing's not which one takes up more of your day, or which one comes first, necessarily. Which one comes first does, under circumstances, have a halachic importance, and it can also have significance on a deeper level, because if a person, I'm going to get to your question in a second, Lisa. If a person gets up first and the first thing they do is check Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and follow up on their emails and go to a few business meetings, and then at the end of the day, before they fall asleep or before it's the deadline to daven, they quickly rattle off davening to get away with it, it's going to be very difficult. Or even if a person then comes and says, you know what, now it's time to pray, I'm going to pray and go all in on prayer, it's going to be very difficult, because a person has already gotten so involved in other things. Practically speaking, it's much easier to do it right if it's earlier in the day. The things that are harder to do and the things that are more important to do, it's always better to do earlier in the day. But at the same time, under these circumstances, she was told to do something else first, to eat first. The question is not what's she doing first, the question is what's the identity? Is the identity of her prayer preparation to eat, or is the identity of her eating preparation to prayer? So asking for practical things is good, if it's done right. If we're eating in order to pray, if we're pursuing material things for the right reason, with the right frame of mind, then that's a good thing. So it's not, pursuing material things is not in and of itself a bad thing at all. If someone doesn't pursue material stability, then they're probably not going to end up in a very healthy place. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done with precautions to keep the orientation of their mind in a healthy place. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay, Lisa?
Sorry, I might have missed it, but how does this connect to the parsha?
Oh, okay. Yes, so I said at the very beginning that we're going to go a little off the beaten path of the parsha, but it ties into generally a general perspective, because this week is Yisro, it's the giving of the Torah, and it also ties into Yud Shvat. That's probably part of the reason that the Rebbe talked about it, because it's the story of the Rebbetzin, and last week was Yud Shvat. But it's a fundamental perspective in our relationship with the Torah, in our relationship with that was given to us in this week's parsha. This week's parsha is the giving of the Torah. It's Parshas Yisro, and this is something that is not specifically addressed in the parsha, but it's a very important perspective in terms of our relationship with that which happened in the parsha, which is the giving of the Torah. So it's how we go about looking at the Torah. And as usual, we've run out of time, but very quickly, the Rebbe goes on at the end to... Oh, so just, I'm going to throw in that little bit. I told you that the Rebbe gets sarcastic in this talk. I wouldn't want to disappoint. So sometimes you'll see the Rebbe actually throws in English words. In the Yiddish final edited version, there are English words the Rebbe throws in television and Sunday school and things that the Rebbe's being sarcastic about. And in this one, the Rebbe talks about, if a person is, you could have a person, and that there are people who their role may not be to just work for 2 hours a day because they can get away with it. There are people who should be working more and amassing great wealth, and there are different perspectives in different sforim about what that's about and what the reason is and everything else, but there's a time and place and people have different roles. The Rebbe addresses people that are extremely wealthy, and the Rebbe says, if your pursuit of your wealth is just because you want to have status of a person who's in a bracket that pays 95% of their income to tax, then, which is a little extreme, I don't know if that ever happened, but as I said, the Rebbe has a tendency to be a little sarcastic in the talks from this period of time, then that's wrong. That's not what you should be doing. And if a person's davening, please Hashem, I'm getting up in the morning and praying because I want to be successful, I want to achieve the status of being someone who pays 95% of the income to tax, that's called davening to eat. If a person has this status, and because this person is so successful, and the nature of things is that people in today's society tend to look up to people who are very financially successful, and they use that out to be an example of someone who's very financially successful and is very highly in tune with their purpose and lives a life that is focused on aligning the world with its purpose and making sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be according to the guidelines of Torah. Other people look and say, wow, this person's in the top 50 wealthiest people in the world, and look what they do and look at the life they live. That could be a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. That could be a great sanctification of God's name. That could have tremendous influence on helping people themselves live life the way that they should. So that's an example of having a huge food basket, but the whole food basket is eating in order to daven. This person's taking the status that they have, which is unique and uncommon, and using it to achieve things that other people without this status cannot achieve. And then the Rebbe finishes off with addressing the fact that in this week's, when the Torah was given, we know that it says that the Hashem instructed Moshe to speak specifically first to the ladies and the girls before the men and the boys. And the Rebbe says, specifically in the context of this discussion and perspective, this is something that ladies have a special an opportunity to achieving generally more than men, because children tend to have in some ways a greater connection with their mother, or a different kind of connection with their mother than they do with their father. I'm a very hands-on involved father, and my kids love me very much, but I still don't get the same cuddles that mummy does. And that means that a mother is in a position where she has the ability to impart this perspective. She has a unique role to play in her ability to impart this perspective and to bring up her children and to raise a family that has this perspective, that understands that there's davening and that they're eating, and both baskets are important parts of life, but we should be eating in order to daven, in order to pray, and not vice versa. And have a good week, everyone, and in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll do it again, same time, same place. Actually, not